Smoov and curly on video.
Recording is on.
Charles, are you a robot?
Not that I know of. Hey man, somebody stole your battery.
That's a great bit.
That is a great bit.
Eddie Murphy, right?
Eddie Murphy. Speaking of Eddie Murphy, how are you doing today, Michael?
I am not sure that counts even as a segue. I was wondering if you had any comments about this episode and thought maybe it had anything to do with computer science. I have a. So what did you think? You thought the episode was kind of wow, more than the previous one?
Well, I mean, there were bigger reveals, including
there are two major ones. Yeah. All right. Well, so spoiler alert. We're talking about an episode that has reveals in it, and you should watch the episode before you listen to our stuff because it's not like we're summarizing the show anyway.
That's true. It doesn't make any sense unless you've seen the show, and even then. So here's the thing that had occurred to me early. And I decided not to do it. So one of the tricks of being a human being for a very long time, watching other people do narratives, is that you begin to kind of know what outcomes are. If you just assume, if I were a writer and I wanted the most ironic possible outcome, what would I make the twist in this particular story be? And then oftentimes you're right. Of course, this is another game theory problem, but the writer knows that I know about the ironic tricks. And so therefore, blah, blah, and you kind of get, the usual thing in the film. So for a while now, I've been wondering how much is it the case, or how likely is it that many of the people we're interacting with are actually hosts? In fact, as was brought up to me by my watching partner during the middle of that episode, was why do they even have human beings doing most of these tasks? Like, why are humans busy chopping up and doing, what's going, especially if we're living in a world where everybody's life is easy as implied by Super Rich Man in Black, then why are people even there doing these menial tasks? This seems like exactly something that the host could do. And there was a sort of hint at that in the previous episode when Maeve says, "Are you like me?" And he says, "No, I'm a," Felix, I think, says, "No, I'm a human." Well, how do you know that? Well, I was born. I'm like, okay, sure. And so they were like throwing out the idea that maybe, how would you know? You could get, that's a philosophical issue, but maybe it's actually a real plot point. And so I've been thinking about, well, I wonder how many people are actually hosts, which ties into something else, which is it has been bothering me for several episodes now how Ford seems to control everything around him without necessarily saying or doing things. And I'm not really sure, what's going on there. And sometimes he says oblique things, but the hosts seem to know exactly what he wants to do, as evidenced in this episode. And it's all very strange. And so I've wondered whether maybe he is actually a host with his consciousness downloaded, or it's actually Arnold, or, who knows? And then I decided to just stop worrying about it and just kind of go with the flow and figure out what data structure is being used for the host and stop trying to
But it's hosts all the way down.
It's hosts all the way down. So the big reveal, at least the big reveal that I'm stuck on for this, was that Commissioner Gordon is actually a host.
It's heartbreaking.
Host, by the way, means two different words, right? Host is in I'm keeping you around and being nice to you, which is how it's mostly used, but also a host can be something that is in a slightly different and more nefarious way, be something that a parasite is on, like someone else's consciousness, for example. Anyways, that was a pretty big deal, and they really set that up just before. Oh, none of the hosts come here. They can't even see things that we don't want them to see. What about this door? What door? I was like, uh-oh.
It's so sad too, because he was the most humane, right, of the people.
Feels like someone's making a point.
Wow.
I love the line where he said to the QA people, it was laughably obvious that you basically made this up, that you intervened in the code. It was very obvious. If your programmers were any good, they'd be working for me.
And the other one, the big reveal is that Teresa's dead.
That felt less like a reveal than an outcome. From Ford's point of view, why does it matter that the hosts are unaware that they're hosts? Because they wouldn't do something?
Yeah, I think they don't. I don't think he trusts them to be convincing. He has another quote too, which was that, they're the ones who are truly free. They're basically free to follow my commands.
It is the freedom of the screwdriver. It is, of course, the freedom of the slave.
Christakis from Yale has a book that came out recently where he argues that there's some fundamental social drives in people. And one of them is that we need leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And his evidence, he's got lots of different evidence for this, for all these different points. But things like basically societies have tried variations on these things, and the ones that violate these loose pieces of structure fail. Like they just don't. It just doesn't work out. So one is that you have to have a leader, but the other one is that leader needs to be not too authoritarian. And because if you have too authoritarian a system, then that also starts to break down.
I guess to me, it is an interesting fundamental question. Why, other than for the dramatic purposes, it is important that the AI not be aware of what it is. To me, it's a fundamental, it's a programming question, right? It's like, why would you do this? Is this important to get the outcome that you want?
So I thought the computer science theme possibly in this episode was code review. Have you engaged in code review?
Yes, I have.
So is it like what they were saying, where once you figure out the bug, then you bring people together in a room and have them kill each other in the bloodiest possible way?
I mean, that's how I worked at IBM when I worked there.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's actually how most people moved up. You move up and get promoted during code review because it's actually a fight to the death. Code review actually was not much different from that. I mean, here, of course, it was, palace intrigue, but the way code review would work is you'd have to get in a room and everyone was looking at this function that was 3 lines long and had 877 lines of comments. And, you had to go through and say, this is what we were doing. This is what we were told to do. Da-da-da-da-da. You go through it. Everybody goes, yes, that makes sense. Or no, wait, what about this? Aren't you violating this rule or whatever? And, la, 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 la. And then you go. So I sat in on a couple of code reviews when I was an intern 130 years ago.
What they were trying to claim is that they did a code review and it revealed that there was this behavior that came about because of the Reverie update. This
is all about how QA is fundamentally evil, which I'm pretty sure we already knew going in, but it's nice to see that HBO understands this. That was the big reveal, but help me think about this thing about Ford. How is Ford making things happen? I mean, he's just making, oblique comments, and this somehow has this major effect on everything around it in very precise detail.
One possibility is, I want to say telepathy, but not in a necessarily supernatural sort of way. So there have been proposals for interfaces where you can use like sub-vocalizations, for example. Like you can kind of monitor aspects of the throat and do speech recognition on unspoken words if you form those words in your throat, essentially.
Right.
So you can imagine that there's basically really subtle cues. He's wired to the system somehow. So it could be that maybe there's little sensors, little microsensors in his body that let him do that.
So there's two kind of outcomes, right? One is he sort of lives forever as a host controlling this, and he's actually the secret whatever, with the goal of running the world, whether it's local or else. Or his goal is actually to free the hosts. And what he's actually doing with the reveries and all the rest is he's going to set them up to be able to go to the next stage, which probably means he has to die.
His goal is not to provide freedom for the host. He wants them enslaved. I mean, there's the corporate force, which is, I think, to exploit this technology for something that hasn't been stated yet. They talked a lot about IP in this episode. Mm-hmm. There's the hosts, and they're trying to free themselves. There's William, who's just trying to figure out who the heck he is. There's the Logan's, whatever Logan is representing, which could be the same as the corporate force, or there could be multiple corporations fighting for this technology. I don't think we can attribute everything to Ford. He does seem to be stunningly powerful, though.
Yes, he does. And he seems to be able to communicate in a way that's not obvious to us. But, he's the programmer. So, you could be hitting Shift, Alt, F7, and you just worked out all the macros, and it's perfectly fine.
MetaX become conscious.
Yes. Well, I'm completely sure there's a complete AI inside of Emacs. And someone just waiting for the right key combinations to get us there.
It is written in Lisp.
It is written in Lisp. That's why it's better than VI.
Here's what it boils down to me. Clearly, there are many hosts on the show we do not yet know are hosts. And because if Bernard's a host, then anybody could be a host. And the question is, do they know they're a host or not? And what does that mean? And why are some of them hosts and why aren't others hosts? What's happening? So a question you can ask yourself is, if Ford is making people like Bernard hosts, notice Bernard's in charge of programming, which means Ford is in charge of programming. So what else would you want to be in charge of secretly if you were really controlling everything?
The other thing I was wondering to get your reaction on is Dolores and William have ended up starting a life together on a river or something, which doesn't seem to make narrative sense. Like, are people not going to notice that he's there? Are they going to be able to live off the land? Like, what do they think is going to happen next?
Well, I mean, William is just going along with the story because Dolores wants this, right? Dolores believes she's going someplace where everything's going to be better. Like she's going to.
So she's still going to the maze.
Yeah, but whether it's the maze or not, I mean, the point is there's a place where you can go where the honey is flowing and the streets are paved with gold, right? That's what she's doing.
I see.
Right, for her, it's the journey is to a place. And when she's at this place, everything will be better. And then she says to him, I am not a key. And I thought, sure you are.
It's easy to objectify her. And she was rejecting being objectified.
Right, which I think is the right thing to do. Anyway, I think this was relatively short. I think the big computing question that's still open is, why, from a programming point of view, do you want to set the hosts up to be unaware? Is this a fundamental question about how intelligence would have to work? That if you were truly aware of what you were doing, you wouldn't be able to fake it, or you wouldn't do certain things because you wouldn't want to do them? Or is it important that there be two of you and they don't talk to one another, or one of them knows about the other? I mean, in some sense, that's what's really going on here. There are two personalities. One of them knows about the other, and that personality is very driven by just doing the thing that it's being asked to do, and the other one thinks it's human and is sort of behaving. And so it's like a sleeper agent. You turn on, they do something, you turn off, and they don't remember it ever happened. But there's a part of them that does. That's a neat narrative device, but I think there's an interesting question about whether that's what you would have to do, in some sense, to keep the intelligences from doing things you don't want them to do. They'd have to sort of not be aware.
I see. So you're talking not specifically about the idea of what would it take to create an intelligence. I think you're talking about what would it take to create an intelligence that is still a tool in a sense.
And what would it take to control an intelligence?
Which remains a big question in the field. That I'm listening to a debate right now between Melanie Mitchell and Stuart Russell. And they're debating specifically about this question of what does it mean to control an intelligence? If an intelligence is defined by its objective function and we get that objective function wrong, we have no other control. It's going to do whatever it's going to do to maximize its objective. So that seems like a problem.
What's our objective function?
That's a question that I've thought about a lot too. I did a podcast with Dave Ackley specifically where I said, I'm really sad I don't understand what our objective function is. Maybe we don't have one.
There's an alternative, right? Which is whatever our objective function is, it can be changed. And that's how you control the intelligences. You change their objective function.
So you're saying our objective function can be changed by who?
Outside forces. But you could basically swap out objective functions or convince people they should have a different objective function.
So the way that usually gets talked about is the system's going to resist having its objective function changed, because if it allows its objective function to change, then the current objective function is very unlikely to be satisfied. And that's what it's trying to satisfy. So it won't let you do that.
I mean, what is social programming and, cultural mumble-foo and generational transfer of this, that, and the other than trying to change someone's objective function? I think we might be done. I think we're just rapidly heading from one episode to another to some massive finale and it's going to turn out that it was all just decision trees. Anyway, I feel like we're in a good place and I want to watch the next episode. So when are we going to do that? When are we going to do that?
Give me a week.
A week?
Oh, come on, man. I killed myself this weekend so that we could do 2 in a row.
The problem is you want to have edited the things before watching the next one. That's the only reason this is difficult.
I like how you accept your objectives as fixed and unchanging, and you assign blame to my objectives as if they were chosen completely at random.
All I'm trying to do is change your objective function, which
Yeah,
is the
sure.
tried and true way of controlling hosts. Michael, are you real?
I hope not, because boy, somebody made a huge mistake.